The end of a year is one of the few moments when I think ordinary people should become a little more ruthless with their money. Not dramatic, not frightened, not theatrical. Ruthless, because most financial lives do not break from one spectacular mistake. They break from neglect. They break because the owner never stops long enough to ask a few plain questions. How much cash do I really have? How much do I owe? How much of my life is already spoken for before the month even begins? What am I paying too much for? What free money am I leaving on the table? What tax shelters am I underusing? What percentage of what I earn do I actually keep? Those are not glamorous questions. That is exactly why they matter. The world trains people to approach the new year emotionally. New year, new me, new habits, new goals, new discipline, new life. Most of that is entertainment. The calendar changes. And people behave as if the date itself contains power. It does not. The date is only a mirror. It reveals whether you have a structure or only intentions. I have never placed much trust in intentions by themselves. Intentions are cheap. Systems are expensive to build and extraordinarily valuable once they exist. So if I were sitting down near the end of the year to reset my financial life, I would not begin by setting 10 ambitious goals, buying a new planner, and promising myself I would become an entirely different man by January 2nd. I would do something much better. I would perform an audit, a real one, because when a person does a genuine year and money audit, he usually discovers one of two things. Either the structure is stronger than he feared and now simply needs consistency, or the structure is weaker than he wanted to admit and now needs truth before it can ever improve. Truth is a good place to start. The first thing I would count is cash. Not in the emotional sense, not what I think I have, not what I probably have if I include next paycheck money that is not even in the account yet. I mean real liquid cash, cash in checking, cash in savings, cash in a money market fund, cash anywhere that can become usable within a few business days without drama. A lot of people think this is too basic to matter. It matters enormously. A man who cannot state how much liquid cash his household controls is not steering a financial life. He is sitting in the passenger seat hoping the driver is competent. Cash is not wealth by itself. I have said many times that idle cash over long periods can quietly become a melting ice cube, especially when inflation is doing its patient work in the background. But cash has a very important job even if it is not the star of the long run. Cash buys time, and time is what keeps an ordinary setback from becoming a desperate decision. When a car fails, a child gets sick, a pipe bursts, a job disappears, or a family obligation shows up in the wrong month. Cash is what prevents the next move from being stupid. That is why I do not like vague language, such as I think we are doing. Okay, I want the number, I want to know exactly how much is liquid, then I want to know what that number is supposed to do. This is where most people get lazy. They keep everything in one account, mentally mix emergency money with short-term goals, and then wonder why every withdrawal feels confusing. The money for next summer. S-trip is not the same as the money that keeps the lights on if your income gets interrupted. The cash for a house down payment is not the same as the reserve that protects your household from a bad surprise. One of the simplest improvements a person can make at year-end is to separate these jobs: emergency reserve in one place, short-term goal money in another, operating cash in another. Not because more accounts are sophisticated, because naming money helps behavior. Money without a job tends to wander off. Money with a clear job becomes harder to misuse. And once I know the cash number, I ask the harder question, is it enough? Sometimes the answer is no, and that matters. Sometimes the answer is yes. But too much of my life is sitting in cash and not enough is being put to work in productive assets. That matters too. There is no universal perfect number because households are different. A self-employed family with volatile income needs a different reserve than a dual income household with strong job stability. A person saving for a near-term move needs more liquid funds than someone whose next major expense is years away. But everyone should know the composition: operating cash, emergency reserve, short-term goal cash. If those buckets are unclear, the whole financial life feels blurrier than it should. The second thing I would do before the year ends is collect every form of free money still available to me. This is one of the strangest failures in personal finance because it is so easy to understand and still so widely neglected. If an employer offers a 401k match and you fail to capture it, you are refusing part of your compensation. People make this sound more complicated than it is. They say they cannot max the plan, or they are not sure whether they should invest elsewhere first, or they want more flexibility, or they will get to it next year. Fine, but before any of those debates matter, ask a simpler question: Have I collected the free money if the employer will match some portion of my contribution? Then not taking that match is not caution, it is leakage. I dislike leakage. A dollar for dollar match up to a certain percentage is one of the best bargains available to ordinary workers. There are not many places in life where you can act and immediately increase the value of the action before the market even has a chance to do anything for you. This is one of them. And if your employer offers an employee stock purchase plan at a discount, then that deserves attention too, though with more judgment. A discount can be attractive. 15% is not nothing, but unlike a broad retirement match, a stock purchase plan concentrates you more heavily in the same place that already pays your wages. That can become a problem if your employer hits trouble at the wrong time. So I would not treat every such plan like a free lunch, but I would absolutely understand the math, the holding rules, the tax treatment, and the size of the opportunity before the year closes. That is what serious adults do with free money. They do not assume the opportunity will somehow wait politely. They understand it, then either take it or decline it for a reason that has been examined, honestly. The third thing I would count is everything I owe, again, not emotionally. Not the version where I know the rough ballpark and prefer not to look too carefully because looking too carefully would make the life feel heavier. I want the exact list: credit cards, auto debt, student loans, personal loans, mortgage, any medical payment plans, any family obligations, formalized into money, everything. Then I sort it by interest rate, not by shame. Not by what irritates me most, not by what I would most like to say is gone. By interest rate. The public loves the emotional versions of debt strategy because the emotional versions feel human. They talk about quick wins, small balances, clean slates, snowballs, the psychological power of eliminating one card first, even if it is not the most expensive. I understand the appeal, but mathematics does not care about your psychology. High interest debt is the enemy. It should not be treated as a character flaw. It should be treated as a fire. If a card is charging 22%, that debt is not just sitting there. It is attacking the future daily. Eliminating it is one of the highest return uses of capital available to the household. You are not merely reducing a balance. You are reclaiming future cash flow from a very expensive predator. This is what year-end truth does. It strips the debt story down to economics. And once I have the liabilities listed, I want the assets listed just as clearly. Bank accounts, brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, health savings accounts, college savings if they exist, home equity if you want to include it. Though I prefer to remember that a primary house is not the same as a liquid investment asset. Business equity if there is business equity, though again, only if the number is grounded in something real and not an ego fantasy. Then I subtract liabilities from assets. That gives me net worth. Now, I do not worship net worth. It can become a silly number if a person checks it too often and ties his emotional state to every market wiggle. A household that watches its net worth daily, once investments become meaningful, is giving volatility too much psychological authority. Still, a yearly or quarterly net worth audit is incredibly useful. Why? Because it tells you whether the structure is improving, not whether one stock had a good week. Not whether your cash balance looks temporarily respectable after a paycheck. Not whether your spending felt calmer this month. It tells you whether your life, in the broadest ownership sense, is actually getting stronger. A person who has not looked at his own net worth in a year may be moving forward or backward and not know which. That is too casual for me. I do not need obsession. I do need awareness, so I would take the number at year end and compare it with the same time last year. Then I would ask two questions. Did it rise for a good reason? And if it did not rise, why not? Sometimes the explanation is perfectly normal. A rough market year can make a strong savings effort look less impressive in net worth terms than it really was. That is fine. The contributions still matter, the ownership still increased, but sometimes the flat or falling number reveals something that needs more honesty. Spending too much, holding too much cash, carrying too much bad debt, not investing enough, not capturing enough free money, letting one major category bloat without really noticing. That is valuable information. The fourth thing I would do is examine the big three expenses. Housing, transportation, food. People love to save money in ways that give them the pleasant feeling of discipline without touching the categories that actually shape their life. They will compare coffee prices, cancel one little subscription, feel virtuous about skipping lunch out twice, then walk back into a housing decision or vehicle decision that quietly swallows the next 10 years of financial flexibility. That is not discipline. That is avoidance wearing a neat outfit. The big three categories deserve respect because they usually determine whether the savings rate has room to breathe. If housing is too large, the whole structure gasps. If transportation is too expensive, cash flow bleeds slowly month after month. If food spending is chaotic, the rest of the budget feels strangely harder than it should. Now, I am not telling people to become ascetics. The point of life is not to achieve the cheapest possible existence. A family can choose to live in a more expensive place for good reasons. A long commute is cost too. A reliable car can be worth paying for. Better food can be worth paying for. I am not interested in crude anti-spending sermons. I am interested in intentionality. If a person is paying $3,000 a month for housing, when a different arrangement at $2,500 would create $6,000 of annual relief, and that relief could be routed into investing or debt elimination, then that is not a tiny choice. It is a structural one. If a household upgraded cars as income rose and now the combined payment is quietly absorbing money that should have been buying future ownership, that is not just a taste issue, it is a future issue. If food spending has become the category where exhaustion and convenience tax the household every week, then a few systems may be worth more than endless guilt year. End is the right time to ask of these categories, is this spending buying real quality of life, or is it mostly autopilot? Autopilot is expensive. The fifth thing I would review is taxes, especially whether I should harvest losses. This subject bores people, which is one reason it creates so much opportunity for avoidable waste. If I sold investments during the year at gains, and I am still holding other positions at losses, then I need to know whether those losses should be realized before year-end to offset gains. This is not a trick. It is simply using the code in an intelligent way. If one position is down and no longer belongs in the portfolio, and another sale created capital gains, then realizing the loss may reduce the tax burden meaningfully. That matters because taxes are one of the most reliable drags on compounding, and avoidable tax leakage deserves almost as much suspicion as high fees. Now, year-end tax work requires precision. The wash sale rule exists. You cannot simply pretend to sell for tax purposes and buy the same thing right back while claiming the loss the way people fantasize about doing. But the broader principle remains sound. A person should know where gains were realized, where unrealized losses exist, and whether the portfolio can be improved after tax by doing some cleaning before December becomes January. I have never enjoyed sending the government more money than required by law just because laziness made me miss the timing. That is not patriotism. That is sloppiness. The sixth thing I would do is renegotiate and reprice my household costs anywhere I can. This sounds small until you see what it does over years. Phone bill insurance, internet, streaming bundles, any legacy bills that have been quietly inflating because the provider knows the customer hates hassle more than the provider fears churn. This is another place where the public lets money leak because the amounts do not look heroic on any one day. Save $100 a month through a few calls and a few provider changes, and you may not feel wealthy tomorrow. Over years, that money can become several $1,000s of investment capital before considering what the compounding of that capital might become. That is not trivial. A lot of financial improvement is not born from one giant move. It is born from finding and keeping a handful of durable efficiencies. Insurance deserves special attention here. A lot of people overpay simply because they have not compared options in too long. Others underinsure because they wanted the lowest premium and did not think hard enough about what risk transfer is actually for. Year-end is a good time to review both price and adequacy. Cheaper is nice, wrong is expensive. The seventh thing I would maximize is the tax advantage money. HSA first in many cases, because it is one of the most powerful accounts in the system when used correctly. I love a good structure. And the HSA is a very good structure, deductible going in, tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals, for qualified medical use. Triple tax efficiency deserves attention. But the key mistake many people make is they use the HSA like a glorified checking account for current medical expenses and never invest the balance. That leaves a lot of its long-run power unused if the account has enough cushion and the cash flow of the household allows it. Investing the HSA funds can turn that account from a convenient tool into a surprisingly powerful wealth component over time. Then there is the Roth IRA. Again, simple and powerful money goes in after tax, grows tax-free, comes out tax-free under the rules. Wonderful. If income is too high for direct Roth contributions, the backdoor route exists. And while it sounds a little exotic when people first hear it, the broad idea is not mysterious. The important thing is understanding the mechanics and the pro rata complication before acting carelessly. What I care about here is not whether a person can quote every IRS nuance from memory. What I care about is whether he is respecting the existence of tax shelters that can materially improve his future and failing to use them only because the subject initially sounded more intimidating than a sports score or a market headline. The public spends enormous time on what is emotionally loud and not enough on what is financially powerful tax. Advantage space is financially powerful. Use it. The eighth thing I would calculate is the savings rate. This number should not be mysterious. If I stopped you on the street and asked what percentage of your income is being saved and invested, you should be able to answer approximately, not perfectly, approximately. And I do not mean only cash parked in a savings account. I mean retirement contributions, pension contributions, taxable investing, perhaps ESPP participation. If it is part of your accumulation system, all the money that is actually building future ownership rather than being consumed. A person who does not know the savings rate does not know the pace at which he is buying future freedom. That is too important to leave vague. Now, I do not think every month must be monitored like a surgical patient. 3-month averages are often much more informative and much kinder on the mind than daily or weekly obsession. But the year-end number matters. It tells you whether your lifestyle is allowing the future to be funded at a meaningful pace. People become emotionally attached to income and strangely casual about savings rate, when the second is far more revealing about the shape of the future. High income with low savings rate is just a loud version of fragility. A moderate income with a healthy savings rate can become quiet strength over time. The ninth and final thing I would do before year end is set 1 or 2 financial targets for the next year and then translate them into a system. Not 10 targets, not a fantasy list. 1 or 2. The reason most financial goals fail is not that the goals are ridiculous. It is that they remain verbal. They never become operational. I want the goal to have a number. I want the number to have a monthly path. And I want the monthly path to have automation or default behavior behind it. If you say next year I want to pay off $14,000 of auto debt, that is not yet a plan. It is a wish. A plan asks what monthly or biweekly amount has to move, what spending has to shrink, what extra income might be created, and what account structure will support that movement automatically. If you say next year I want to max my Roth IRA, same thing. That is not a plan until you know what amount must be transferred from where, on what schedule, and how you will prevent ordinary life from interrupting it. This is the part I like most, the operating system. A good money life should not depend on constant moral heroism. It should run automatic transfers into savings, automatic transfers into investing, bills scheduled deliberately, separate sinking funds for irregular but predictable expenses. A visible dashboard simple enough to review without making yourself miserable. This is how you get the future funded before fatigue, distraction, and mood sabotage the process. Most people do not need more inspiration. They need fewer decisions. The more times you ask a tired human being to make the right money choice in real time, the lower the odds that the right choice survives the month. So I would use year-end to build the operating system, the 1 or 2 meaningful goals, the savings transfers, the investment transfers, the bill rhythm, the reserve accounts, the tax space, the debt attack order, the insurance and provider cleanup. That is enough. More than enough. And if you do all of this, well, something subtle but powerful happens. Money stops feeling like a recurring emotional crisis and starts feeling more like a background system that is gradually strengthening your life. That is one of the finest uses of money I know. It should support the life, not occupy the whole mind. That is why I do not think a year-end reset should be about drama. No dramatic declarations, no overnight reinvention, no shame spiral because the year was imperfect. Just truth count the cash, collect the free money, list the liabilities, measure the assets, know the net worth, examine the big 3 expenses, harvest losses, if it makes sense. Use the tax shelters, know the savings rate, choose 1 or 2 clear targets, then automate what you can, so the future gets funded before the new year has time to become noisy. That is not a glamorous process. Good, the glamorous processes usually cost too much and endure too briefly. I like the useful ones, and a useful year-end audit done honestly can do something that almost no motivational speech ever does. It can change the trajectory without changing the personality. That is a much better bargain, because most people do not need to become different people to get stronger with money. They need a clearer structure than the one they are currently living inside. Year-end is a wonderful time to build it.